All right, we're live. Just gonna wait for people to trickle in. Um, I was intending to talk about that letter penned by the 50 French generals, and it's interesting. There was a Guardian piece about this. A French journalist was describing, because this has received so much publicity, and the way it's being talked about makes it sound like a coup within France is imminent, that you're going to see a repeat of what the generals in Algeria tried to do to Charles de Gaulle decade, decades ago when he was president of France. And the Guardian writer, it's actually a pretty so. He explained how most of these generals there, these are these are all, or for the most part, retired generals. They don't have any real connection to the military, to active duty soldiers, and you would need a base of active soldiers in order to implement any sort of coup. And it's kind of interesting, the parallels to what's happening in the United States, because some of these men were actually purged from the military, and you have the general now who was actually fired from the Space Force because he wrote a book that objected to critical race theory. And you've seen this over going back to the Obama administration, um, with but even before that, you've seen this gradual takeover of the and the, I don't know if you would call it subversion, but basically instituting political litmus tests for higher officers, for generals, mandating that they have to subscribe to certain left-wing nostrums in order to advance their careers. And that's why you don't see many high-ranking officers, many people in the military defending this guy who was just fired, because they realize it'll be disastrous to their future careers, particularly if they want to advance in the hierarchy, and after they retire, get cushy gigs with CNN and MSNBC and consulting contracts, which can be blocked, um, if they go out on a limb and say this is ridiculous, that critical race theory and intersectionality and all of these left-wing nostrums have no place in the military. And you're really seeing the military become a vehicle for social engineering, which shouldn't be surprising, because that's. But the interesting thing is seeing the parallels in France itself. It's kind of it's kind of funny to see people in that country rise up against these ideas, which they view as foreign foreign ideas, trying to undermine the French ethos of unity, of opposition to any sort of identity based politics, which is de rigueur in the United States. And it's curious to see what will happen with France in the coming months, because obviously they have a contentious election coming up. You have Emmanuel Macron, who's really unpopular and also extremely powerful, who's accrued all of this power to himself, and yet is widely reviled throughout the country. And French, I don't know if he still has citizenship, but a while back last year we discussed this, and he said that it was virtually impossible to it would be virtually impossible to unseat Macron just because of the way he's systematically eliminated opposition to him and sort of crafted tweaked the system to the point where he can run over all of his enemies using state funding and acquiring various emergency powers. He's sort of eliminated the threats of power. And the funny thing is, you did not see much media criticism of this until relatively recently. I would say within the past couple of months, they sort of turned a blind eye. I'm not sure about French media, but international media, they didn't really focus on this, despite the fact that they endlessly criticize Viktor Orban or the ruling party in Poland and various Central European parties, which they characterize as undemocratic. And I think the important thing to remember is that when a party is described as undemocratic, they don't actually mean undemocratic in the sense of opposing democracy, whether it's popular democracy or or um, Republican democracy. Having a government that's reflective of the voters' will. That's not what they mean, because all of these governments are extremely popular, and were not only elected but have had their policies ratified through the voters repeatedly. What they mean by undemocratic is not holding the values espoused by the European Union and liberal journalists, progressive journalists, not being in favor of not being in favor of unfettered immigration from the third world, supportive of the LGBT movement, doing things that a liberal or progressive journalist would find hostile to their value system. That's basically what they mean by undemocratic. They mean going against the tide that you've seen in Europe and Western Europe and America and Australia and South America over the past few decades. That's basically what they mean by undemocratic. Hi, Alejandro. Um, and it's really a manipulation of language. They're not there, and you can see this. You can see this in the reporting when they're describing a leader who is actually democratically elected. They're not totalitarian. They weren't installed by force, but they espouse views that are antithetical to the views that that particular journalist or NGO or EU leader esteems. So that's why Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, despite the fact that they are democracies, that they're not they're not totalitarian states with an authoritarian ruler. You could describe some of their actions as authoritarian, but you can't describe them as undemocratic. The fact that Orban wants to restrict the activities of George Soros and his minions, that he doesn't want his own government to be undermined or the system of migration to be determined by foreigners, that doesn't really mean he's not democratic in the classical sense of that term. Now, um, even the letter by these French generals, you couldn't classify it as "Hi, Richard." Yeah, endangering the EU. That's one of the other things that they describe. Hi, build for speed, that they described as undemocratic. The idea subverted, and again, this is sort of this is sort of it's an inversion of reality when you actually look at what the EU does and how it functions, the structure. It's one of the most undemocratic institutions that you could imagine. You basically have a small oligarchy within the European Commission determining policy for a broad spectrum of European citizens living in all of these countries, and it's it's the antithesis of democracy. Um, yeah, uh, I talked about this a little bit in the last live stream. There are only, I think, maybe a quarter of the people who actually watch these videos because of notifications. I think external other people find it from external sources. I think 25% from notifications, and subscribers. I think it's 50%. I'm not sure. I have to check, but I do know a lot of notifications, but a lot don't. So you see some people trickling in now. Um, but yeah, the EU is it. I mean, it's a symbol of thwarting democracy, and a great example of this is the repeated votes that countries like France and the Netherlands and Ireland um, made on the EU, the Lisbon Treaty. The idea that in terms of popular democracy, the EU wasn't instituted through popular democracy. And in fact, whenever they've had um, votes ratifying the concept of EU membership, um, or a policy that the EU supported, whenever they've had popular votes or plebiscites, almost every single time the EU has been rejected. The Maastricht Treaty and and uh, all of these subsequent EU uh, these EU accession treaties, almost, you know, if it was a democracy said they want the EU, and that's very rarely happened. I mean, the UK had a vote on the predecessor to the EU. They approved that, but ever since then, up until Brexit, there was no actual there was no actual decision made by the British public. And once it was put on, once the UK EU referendum was put forth, the Brits rejected it. Um, yeah, it's diluted. It's really diluted. The idea that we're going to have a quote unquote democratic institution that limits what a sovereign parliament can do, or what a country's political institutions can do regarding domestic policy or foreign policy, is really, it's I mean, it's it's an oxymoron. It's really ridiculous. Um, and even the criticism of the French the letter by the generals, shot across the bow, I think, is overblown. It's simply a group of French former retired military officers saying that the country is being destroyed through a series of policies of open immigration from the Middle East and North Africa, and the imposition of Islam onto the French political dynamic. I mean, if you think about this logically, what's more undemocratic? People in France objecting to their society being altered, having a top down policy shift that changes the composition of the country, or a group of elected and unelected officials uh, conniving together in order to change the electorate of France, in order to and therefore perpetuate their own route. I mean, to me, the latter seems a lot more undemocratic when you think about it. The idea, importing people who um, don't have a stake invested in the French system. I mean, you see this throughout Europe, particularly after the flood of refugees that came into Germany, the over 1 million predominantly Islamic refugees, predominantly male, uh, quote unquote, refugees who came into Germany, and they've altered the German system. And it's amusing that the party, and Angela Merkel's party, the CDU, and the CSU, their sister party, their support has plummeted to the point where they're probably going to, or they might come in third in the national elections. There might be a green prime minister. So I think that's a that would be a democratic referendum on this policy. The idea that the successor to Angela Merkel will be destroyed politically, and her future will be finished. That's a result of their own resistance to accepting popular throughout Europe, in the Netherlands now, and also the UK. The 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 people who are exercising democratic rights, for example, the right to assemble, and criticizing the lockdowns, are being brutalized by the state. So the idea that the people running these institutions believe in democracy is a chimera. It does not exist. Anyway, that was just my opinion on on some of these things. Feel free to arrive at your own conclusions. But I think I'll make this a short one, and I'll see all of you next time. Bye, Richard, Alejandro, Bill for Speed, anyone else watching. See you later. Bye.